welcome everyone to our November coffee chat. I am Laura Knutson-Murray. I'm the GIS coordinator and community outreach assistant with IrisBG. With us today is Shanna Jones, the social media and community outreach assistant. Irvin Rustin is the CEO and founder of IrisBG, and Mari Rustin, who is director of strategy and product manager. On this recording, the presentation material will be made available in the Knowledge Library. As with all of our previous coffee chats, they can be found under the category Articles and Presentations. You can also follow the topic coffee chats and will be notified via email every time something new is published. And these coffee chats are for you. We really would like to see you all ask us questions and questions of each other. If there's something you would like the community's input on, if you have a topic you would like us to discuss, or if you would like a demonstration of IrisBG's functionality, or even give us feedback on something to improve. It could be anything, big or small. Here is the map of everyone who registered today. Fun to see just where everyone's coming from. And this is part of why we have you rename your screen name. You can perhaps make some connections today. So our agenda today, we have with us Dr. Anna Florence from the National Trust for Scotland. And she will be talking to us about tackling a recording backlog. Sure, we've all been there, and it's great to hear someone's experience and just have a great discussion about approaches that we can take. Let's quick do a poll just to get the experience of everyone here, whether you're an advanced IrisBG user, intermediate, just trying out the trial. Give us an idea of who is here today. Looks like about half are intermediate, 24% advanced, and almost 30% novice, so a good mixture of people. And I will turn the presentation over to you.
Great. I think I'll just start by saying thank you to the team at IrisBG for asking me to come and speak to you all today. I work for the National Trust for Scotland. My job title is the Curator of Plant Collections, which is a little bit of a mouthful. I've been in the role for about 4 years, just starting pre-COVID. I think it's important to note that my responsibilities for the Trust cover quite a range of things, plant records being the thing that takes up most of my time at the moment, but I'm also responsible for sort of our legal compliance in terms of plant acquisitions, our collections policies, conservation scheme oversight, giving advice to our gardens when they're looking to develop their collections. And I'm also supposed to do a bit of interpretation, but I will say there are only so many hours in a week. So at the moment, plant records takes up most of my life. So the first thing I thought I would do is give you a bit of an introduction to the National Trust of Scotland, seeing quite an international audience here. First thing I will say is, do not confuse us with the National Trust. You've probably heard of them. We're a separate organisation from the National Trust. They operate in England, Ireland and Wales. We just operate in Scotland, and we're a lot younger, but we do exactly the same thing. We're a charity who's independent of government, and our remit is to protect and promote the heritage of Scotland for the people. We care for quite a lot of different types of places and properties across Scotland. Here you can see a photograph of Culzean Castle, which is a castle in Ayrshire, quite near one of Trump's golf courses. Interesting American connection for this property is President Eisenhower stayed here on one of his visits, and we now have the Eisenhower Suite that if you're on holiday you can book out. It has a fantastic walled garden and extensive rhododendron collections. We look after more industrial places, so this is Preston Mill, for those of you who are Outlander fans, but it was used as one of the locations for Outlander, and it's a functioning mill, it still works. Look after two of Scotland's probably most famous battlefields, Culloden and Bannockburn. This photograph is from the statue at Bannockburn. This is Robert the Bruce on top of a very scary looking horse, but I'm pretty sure if there was an English army running at you across the battlefield, you would look quite scared as well. And then we look after gardens. I have 38 major gardens in my portfolio, plus smaller bits spread across the length and breadth of the country. So here is a map of sort of our rough locations for our gardens. All the way from Dumfries and Galloway in the south, we have a collection of quite what we'd call our West Coast gardens. Unsurprisingly, on the West Coast, we've got your sort of more formal walled gardens, quite a lot of them in Aberdeenshire. People in Scottish history liked building castles in Aberdeenshire. We have a lot of castles with nice walled gardens in Aberdeenshire. In terms of our gardens, I thought I would just highlight, in case you're planning a holiday, some of our probably most important collections. So this is Inverview, which is the one right up the north where it says Ullapool in the middle, and really quite a remote location. This is probably one of our most famous gardens that we look after. It was created by Osgood Mackenzie. It benefits from the Gulf Stream. It's quite actually, even though it's quite far north, it's very sheltered, and that means it can grow quite a lot of tender and exotic plants. It's famed for its rhododendron collections, and there's a saying that it has a rhododendron in flower for every month of the year. But it also has quite a lot of rare conifers making up the shelter belt, which is a really lovely place to visit in the summer. Over in Aberdeenshire, we have Crathis. This was owned by the Burnett family, and they developed the walled garden area, Sir James and his wife Lady Sybil, in the early 20th century. Now, the yew hedges that you can see here cut into the sort of egg cup, we call them egg cups, the odd-shaped topiary, they date back to 1702 in those forms. So really quite historic original features. It has a national collection of Malmaison carnations and a nationally significant rare conifer collection on the wider estate. And last bit, this is my favourite garden, although you shouldn't have favourites. This is Branklin down in Perth. This is a much newer garden. It was started in the 1920s by a couple called Dorothy and John Renton. And they worked in real close collaboration with plant hunters. And it's probably its most notable feature is its collection of alpine plants, covering quite a large area of the garden, different types of alpine planting set out. And if you're ever there, I can also thoroughly recommend Florence in the cafe. But that's a sort of setting the scene for this project and where we're going. So I gave this talk at a group of plant records managers and another organisation, so I've adapted it slightly. But the premise for the talk originally was challenges. What challenges do we come across in our plant records, and what challenges do I have in my sort of day-to-day role since starting? So when I was originally writing this talk, I started making a list, and you're all going to probably be with me on all of these. So I started making a list of all the challenges that I have, keeping our taxonomy up to date. That's a big challenge that we face. Getting people to do record keeping in the first place. Our garden staff are very busy, especially in the summer period when a lot of the planting happens. You know, they're cutting the grass, they're putting the marquee up for the wedding at the weekend, they're speaking to the visitors. It's very easy to write your new plantings down on a bit of paper and say, I'll sort that later. And then it goes into the pile of to sort later on the desk. Number of sites, like I said, 38. Keeping everybody on track for 38 sites is quite a challenge. I kept going. Remote locations and bad connectivity. I have one site that the main telecoms company for the area refused to take a Wi-Fi cable down the road to it. So we had to troubleshoot a solution for that. Unidentified plants. I'll come on to that later. Abbreviations. I'm sure you're all with me on that one. Abbreviations are the bane of my life. People historically that put abbreviations in systems that made perfect sense to them that do not make sense to me. I kept going. Locations. Trying to work out in historic maps where beds are in the present day is a big issue. Inconsistent application of our data standards across our entire portfolio. A lack of understanding of the importance of record keeping by the wider organisation as a whole. As an organisation, we're trying to do so many things that sometimes actually the quick win for getting that marquee up to host that wedding to bring income in takes precedence over the importance of giving somebody time to do plant records. So that's a constant thing that we have to work on. I kept going. At this point, I needed a strong cup of tea because I was getting a bit stressed. We're not a botanical garden. We're a heritage garden, and that also does presents its own challenges. We have a lot of historic information that we want to capture as part of our plant records, but we might not fill out as many fields as perhaps a botanical garden does, and so on and so forth. But the main thing that was the big challenge for me was out-of-date records. A bit of backstory to how we ended up where we ended up. We, as an organisation, used to use probably 2009 to 2016, we used a different computerised plant records database. The technology was really, really very old, and the company behind it had long since shut down. What that meant is there was no software support behind the database. So as bugs crept in and things broke, more and more of our properties stopped being able to access our recording system. What that meant was everybody, 38 different gardens, decided 38 different ways of doing plant recording, whatever suited them. There also wasn't anybody in a central position to oversee it. So there was nobody maintaining standards across the organisation. So very quickly, 38 different interpretations become 38 very different interpretations of plant recording. We had people who used Excel spreadsheets here. Here you can see, I mean, this is reasonably okay. Everything's got an accession number. You've got the taxon, you've got the amount you got, where it was sourced from. But if you look at this very last column, I'm sure you can all see the issue. Only one of these has a location listed against them. And near Plant Hunters Walk, how near is near? Is near on the left side of the path? Is near on the right side of the path? Is near a metre from the path? Or am I going to have to go hunting in the undergrowth? We had things like this. So this is probably what you would think of before computerised systems, your traditional accession book, where properties went back to using this system. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with this. It's got a date, it's got the taxon, the accession number, where it came from, how much, and in this case, where it was put. But there's no movement records. There's no removal records here. This is just a list of additions. As staff turnover continued to happen and there was nobody forcing people to do plant records, we started to end up in situations, some places where it's just a folder with every invoice thrown in it. Again, that's still data, that's still useful information, but that is in no way searchable, no way, I think we can all agree it's not fantastic. And then we had places that had went to quite a visual system. So while you're looking at this, guys, this is the fruit tree map for one of our properties. Now, I've used this to audit this property. This is actually very accurate, but I'm sure you can see as a management system, this is not ideal. You know, every time you add something in, that bit of paper is going to get really, really congested. There's no accession numbers on, well, there are some accession numbers up the side. And we all know that the glue on sticky notes is really, really strong, and those sticky notes are never going to fall off that bit of paper and end up in a puddle halfway around the garden. You know, that data is never going to get lost. So we ended up in a situation where we had all of this happening across our 38 gardens. And some places, due to the pressures that they were under for other operations, and there was nobody saying you must keep plant records, some places just stopped. So when I started in 2019, we had all of these sort of 38 different types of data. We also had the old electronic data that was sitting in our database that was creaking along in its last legs. So I was brought in to try and start the process of fixing this. So obviously the priority was to get a new system in place. When we started writing up the spec for what we needed, it quickly became clear that we needed something that could cope with our multiple sites, which meant that, you know, we were looking at a professional solution. Our data had to be secure, and that we're all familiar, certainly in Europe, with GDPR legislation, data protection, data security was really important. It would have been very helpful if whatever system we went with, they were familiar with transferring our data out of our old database system, which was called Demeter. And also it was really important to us that there was good technical support and a big community of users so that we were not just on our own. So we spoke to our IT department and it very quickly became clear, and I'm talking to the converted here, we went with IrisBG. So Iris rescued our old data out of Demeter. So now I have a database with data that the last property, 2016, roughly, the data was updated. A lot of properties previous to that was the last time it had been updated in an electronic format, and then 38 different versions of locally held data. So this is quite a big task to try and sort out. I think I managed to split it up into three main problems that we had. First one, out of date records, that goes without saying. Second one, out of date taxonomy. Iris, when they migrated our data, updated it to the latest APG taxonomy, but all of our cultivar names and things were not in the best of condition. And we had a lot of just general bad data. I've got some examples. Our source database was quite poor. So here's an example at the top. It says garden centre near Crieff. Now, Crieff is a village in Scotland. There are about 4 garden centres nearby. I don't know what one this plant was sourced from. I will never find out what one this plant was sourced from. If you look at the bottom, Garden and Clat and Garden and Keith. Clat and Keith are villages in Aberdeenshire. Is that just some random person's garden? I suspect not. I suspect this came from a national collection or something that's been transferred into our care. But actually, I don't have an address or a source. I have somebody's name that goes with that. So tidying all of that up is quite a big task that we've made really good headway in. And then a lot of our existing records are really sparse. So here, this is an example of an electronic record that we had at the start of the project for a rhododendron. As you can see, no source data, no provenance data, an abbreviation in the comments. Now, I worked out what that meant, but that was sheer luck. I'll tell you what that meant later in the talk, but I will say a lot of our database is full of abbreviations that meant something to the gardener at the time. Unfortunately, they've retired. A lot of them have actually passed away. So that data continuity has gone. We will never work out what some of the abbreviations mean, but we will never delete them in case one day somebody has a eureka moment. So that was the bad data sort of situation. Now, it quickly became clear that this was going to be beyond our garden staff's capabilities to sort themselves. They have so many time pressures actually managing and looking after the gardens that there was no way I could expect them to then start not just auditing. They could probably audit their gardens, but doing the data work, the matching up of all the plants that they're seeing in the ground with the historic records and the locally held records, that was going to be logistically just a task too far. So I pitched for a project in order to bring in some additional resource. And I was successful in that, pitching that to my organisation. I don't know what will work for you guys if you guys are looking to pitch to your organisations, but I used big scary words like legal compliance, disease, things like that, to sort of set the scene to say why doing plant records are really important. And luckily our organisation was totally on board with that. The timing was right. We'd just finished auditing all of our interior collections, so all our paintings and tables and chairs and china. So the atmosphere in our organisation was right to come and do a big gardens inventory project. Now, out of those 3 main problems, solving them all, the way our organisation works is it tends to be a 3-year project that you get resource for a 3-year project. We're never going to solve all of those in 3 years. So we had to think about what is the aim of the project? What are we trying to do that is realistic for us to do in 3 years that will also give us a really good baseline for future work? So the aim of the project was to create an up-to-date plant records database with a baseline of data that is of use to our garden staff. Now that means that we're not necessarily concentrating on putting in tons of historic data. We have put in a lot of historic data where we've came across it. I will caveat that just now. But the aim of it is to get something that if our gardeners go out into the garden and they remove a plant, they can come back to the office, mark it as removed in the database, and they've got a system that they can interrogate so they can understand the composition of their plant collections and some of the history. So I'll come back to this because I've got a story to share with you later where we deviated from this and it caused problems because we lost sight of what our original question was. Anyway, we got the plants project, which stands for, and I didn't come up with this acronym, I'm gutted I didn't come up with it, my manager came up with it, but it stands for Plant Listing at the National Trust for Scotland. 3-year project with 3 regionally based inventory teams. Now, in the summer, they spend their summer months moving from one property to the next, basically inventorying the gardens, starting at bed 1 at the gate, making a list of everything left to right, front to back, looking at the old data where it exists and trying to match things up. In the winter months, they're then going back to the offices and they're crunching all that data, putting it all into Iris, cleaning all of our existing records, improving the quality of them where we have the historic information to add in. And yeah, we're about a year and a half through, so we've just finished our second inventory season and we're just in the process of doing the data crunching for our second season. And while it's had its challenges and its hiccups, I'm going to touch wood here, we're on track. Don't say that. I feel like I said that and now something terrible is going to go wrong tomorrow, but we're on track. Now, it sounds, when I tell people who are not horticulturalists that this is what they're doing, they go, oh yeah, that's really easy. Oh yeah, you just make a list of the plants. Great. I just wanted to highlight as part of this talk sort of 4 of the major challenges that we found with this approach. People who are perhaps in our situation might be thinking about doing some sort of auditing process or inventory project. So I thought it might be quite useful for us to highlight sort of the 4 major challenges that we found using this approach. Now, there are other approaches we could have taken, but this is the approach that fits into 3 years and works for our business model. So sort of 4 main challenges that we've found are plant identification, seasonality, verification levels, and the one that I would be really interested if people had some advice on at the end or could have a chat about is matching. What to do with plant records that we're pretty sure the plant still exists, but we don't have the confidence to match it to the plant, how people are tackling that sort of situation. But I will start with plant identification. So like I said, it sounds quite simple. You turn up to a garden, you make a list of everything you see from left to right, front to back. Now, we brought in specialist teams to do this work, but our collections are so diverse. I mean, we have one team member in our West team who's really, really passionate about conifers. She's really, really good in her conifers, fantastic with her conifer identification, but perhaps lift her out and put her into a rock garden and the knowledge just isn't there. Nobody can be an expert in everything. We also have extensive collections of more specialist plants. I mean, I've put some photographs up here. These are 5 photographs of type 1 yellow daffodils from one of our sites. Now, one of our sites in Glasgow has over 500 different daffodil cultivars. Identifying all of these is incredibly, incredibly challenging. Now, what I will say is it quickly became clear that whereas our teams maybe didn't have the knowledge to do this across all of our sites, involving our garden staff was really key. They are the ones who work with these plants every day. They are the ones that potentially planted a lot of these plants. They know what they got delivered, or they've seen it when it looked absolutely beautiful at the peak of the season one year. So getting them involved in the audits was really, really key. So what we've done is when our teams turn up, we ask for our garden staff, whoever's most appropriate, our propagator or our collections gardener or our nursery manager, will shadow the teams while they're there. It doesn't also provide us with advice, but it means that they're getting invested in the program of work. They feel ownership for some of the data, and I really think that's going to be key to our success in keeping the databases up to date after the project's finished. We are identifying everything down to as low a taxonomic level as we feel comfortable with. Now, this is what I meant when I said a baseline of data as part of the project aim. This will mean that we are leaving that we do have a certain proportion of our collections that we are only identifying down to, say, genus level. So here, I might record this as 2 different hosta SPs, hosta idents. We will give them an accession number. We will mark their locations. I will add a comment that says one is variegated pale green, one is large leaved, so that we can differentiate the records, because we don't have labelling. Some of our sites don't. We're not a botanical collection, we're a heritage organisation. So some of our sites don't necessarily have detailed labelling, because in the 1850s they wouldn't have had detailed labelling. That sort of, it throws an extra curveball into our collections. But the idea is to make sure that we get everything recorded, even if it's just down to genus level, so that everything has a record, we know where everything is. That'll mean that in the future we can target our resources for where we need to bring in experts. So rhododendron collections, identifying rhododendrons is an incredibly specialist task, especially we have a lot of cultivars at some of our sites, which adds another layer of complexity. So at the moment, we are marking everything as rhododendron. We're sticking a tag number on it so we can match the record back to that plant. And then actually, I will then be able to go back and say, right, I've got enough money this year for 3 weeks of a rhododendron expert's time. Actually, I've got 50 in Aberdeenshire and I've only got 20 in Edinburgh, so I'm going to send them to Aberdeen. It'll enable me to deploy my resources in the future more effectively for the organisation. And it also means that we can still manage our collections. I still know where our key rhododendron collections are. That helps us in planning for natural disasters, disease, outbreaks, propagation, that sort of thing. One of the decisions that we had to make as part of the project was to what level of plant identification we were going to go to. The other challenge that we've had is seasonality. So obviously we've got 3 years to do this. Now, if my team turn up at Culzean for 3 weeks in August, there's going to be no sign of a snowdrop. There's going to be no sign of a spring bulb, a daffodil. The apples aren't going to be ripe to take for identification, to look for the fruit identification. So seasonality is quite a big issue. This is a tree peony. I'll give a cut. This isn't one of our properties. This is my back garden. It's not in flower. If I come back 3 weeks later, there will be a beautiful flower on that. But if my team miss it, there is no way for them to identify it, really. So that had the potential to mean that we were identifying lots more than we needed to as idents or species or just at genus level. So we've sort of got 2 solutions to this that we're working with at the moment. The first one is that we're actually going back for seasonal revisits to each property. So we're doing one big hit for, say, 3 weeks in the summer. And then in the autumn, they'll go back for a week, guided by the garden staff as to when the best time to catch stuff is. And then in the spring, they'll go back for another week. And that enables us to really pick up a lot of the seasonal stuff. What we're doing in terms of things like mist flowering is we're leaving a list with the garden staff of the plants that we want them to keep an eye on. And when they are seeing these things coming into flower, we're asking them to write down what it is, so that we can then take that data back and put it in the database. That means that we're not missing quite as much. And it's also giving the garden staff a chance to, like I said before, become invested in the data and the data collection themselves. Both of these mitigations will miss, but this will then just become an ongoing task. Every year I'll have a list of unidentified stuff that when I'm at a property, when our garden managers are at a property and our garden staff are asked to look at every year. So this will just move into our rolling work plan. The last sort of decision that we had to make as part of this project is on verification. Now, I think we're all, a lot of you will come from botanical garden backgrounds. Now, in terms of verification, I'm meaning by an expert, by somebody who's renowned in their field, or by DNA testing, or by expert comparison, that sort of thing. Now, we don't have the resources as part of this project to do that for all of our specialist collections. We are having to target things. So we are making a lot of assumptions as part of the project that local knowledge is enough. So this is Clematis nellymosa, which is quite a famous, well-known clematis. Our gardener said that's what it was. I'm making the assumption that that is what I'm recording it as in the database. Now, what I'm not doing is marking it as verified. So we will know that this plant has not been verified by an expert. We're making a lot of assumptions that what something came in as is what it is. Now, we all know that we order stuff from the nursery. We think we've ordered plant X and it arrives in the shipment and it's actually plant Y. But we're taking a common sense approach to this. So if I got an invoice that says I got Hosta Blue Giant and I looked at this, I would be going, no, Blue Giant is not variegated. So I would be saying, right, that is not going down as Hosta Blue Giant. But if I looked at this Hosta and it was, Blue Gianty, I would be making the assumption that what we got is what we ordered. But again, I'm not marking it as verified, so we know that plant has not been verified by an expert. We are doing some verification as part of the project. We're mainly focusing on our apple collections and our rhododendron collections. Now, we managed to rediscover a previous verification that happened, which this was one of the most exciting things to come out of the project so far. At one of our properties on the West Coast, we had previously had verification done by two world-renowned experts in rhododendrons, Cox and Chamberlain, but we'd lost the link between the plants and the data. So I had all the data, but I didn't know what plants they referenced. We managed to recreate that link. We found all the original tag numbers in a file that had the verifications listed next to the tag numbers. So we haven't re-verified them, but we've reattached the original verification to the correct plants, which was really exciting. And that's what that CC meant in the record. That was my abbreviation that I worked out what it was. CC stood for Cox and Chamberlain. We're continuing our rhododendron work. We're getting somebody in to look at our rhododendrons, Brodick and Arduni at the moment, and we're hoping to expand that to Culzean next year. And our apples, we're sending some of our apples away for DNA testing. And I've got an exciting result to share with you from last year's DNA testing that came back. But yeah, really, this slide should have been a few slides ago. This is just to say, in the future, while we're not verifying everything, it'll enable me to better deploy resources. So if I've got one unidentified conifer in Oban, one in Forres and one in Edinburgh, but 5 in Aberdeen, I'm going to send the conifer expert to Aberdeen and ask them to work on those collections. That's going to be the best value for the trust. Now, this is less a practical auditing challenge that we've came across. This is a data challenge, and I would be really interested to hear your thoughts on this if you guys have had similar experiences. You'll have heard me say before that we had an existing database full of out-of-date data, and we had locally held types of data. Now that's the base data set that we're working from, but quite a lot of the time I turn up or my team turns up to a garden and I've got a bed list from 2016 and it has three rhododendrons listed on it. 2 of them have nurseries listed as sources and 1 of them potentially has a wild collection information in it. But I turn up to this bed and I'm only looking at 1 rhododendron. At some point in the last 10, 20, 30 years, 2 of those rhododendrons have been removed and 1 is only alive, one is still alive. What record does that plant match? Now, the flip side of that we have also came across is where we have a situation where we have 1 record and we found 3 plants when we turn up. All look about the same age, all the same species. Now, was there 3 original plants and whoever created the original record just recorded it as 1? Or did we buy 1 and actually they sent 3 as a part of a wider deal or something that's happened historically? I don't know. Now, this has caused us to scratch our heads quite a lot. Now, we don't want to lose any of the original data because it's actually quite valuable. In terms of the first example, that wild collected information is really, really important. And we might work out in the future through DNA testing, we can go back to the botanical collection that perhaps gave us the plant or match it with herbarium samples, that sort of thing. So we don't want to lose that data. So this is where we lost sight of our original collection. Now, because we didn't want to lose that data, what we did originally is we did nothing. We just left that 1 record because we didn't want to lose that data, or we left those 3 records and we created a new status, which we called possibly present, unmatchable to plant. Now we were all sitting, patting ourselves on the back going, yes, that's an excellent idea, fantastic. Until we handed our first property set over to the garden. And the garden were going about their business and they came back to us and said, well, we've had to remove 1 because it's got disease. What record do I mark as dead? So we'd failed there. We had failed in creating a usable data set for our gardeners, for them to now, from the present day, to start recording their actions in the garden, which are really important. That's adding to the information about the management of our sites. That's helping us understand the pressures. We were talking before the call started, we were talking about exceeding climate pressures that are really starting to affect our sites. We're not going to know what proportion of our plants we're losing through changes in conditions. Yeah, we made a mistake. So the solution we've come up with at the moment, because we don't want to we don't want to lose that information. We are still going to try and make those connections to the original plants. Like I said, we're going to go back and look at all of our gardeners keep daily notebooks. So this will be a future piece of work, going in, looking at all of our sort of archival information to try and make those connections. But what we've done is we have I know this is bad record keeping in some aspects, but we have effectively created duplicate records deliberately. So in that case, where we've got 3 plants and 1 existing record, we've marked the existing record, we've created a status that says potential duplicate record, we've created 3 new records which reference the plants, have the tag numbers in it, have the locations listed correctly, and then we're in a custom attribute on the original duplicate record, we're cross-referencing the accession numbers, so we know which new records that existing record is a potential duplicate of. I've probably not explained that very well. Like I say, we're now into our 2nd year and we found that's worked quite well. We are going to continue a programme of work to try and discover the identities of these plants so we can delete the duplicate record and reinstate the real record. But I'd be really interested to know if anyone else has a different solution to that sort of problem. So yeah. And then I think the other thing I just wanted to mention is some more fun challenges. So our teams have faced real practical challenges in doing this work. A lot of our properties are really remote. So this is the team at Inverview Garden, where there is very little Wi-Fi signal. You know, we're working with paper because there is no internet signal, there's no phone signal, 4G to be able to do it electronically. The weather, so I'm assured by my team that it was roasting on this day, absolutely really, really warm. It was also pouring with rain at the same time, so they had to don full waterproofs. And then the Great Scottish Midge is the ever-present challenge in working in Scotland in the summertime. For those of you from further afield, a midge is a really vicious, tiny, tiny, tiny little biting insect that makes life horrendous in Scotland in the summer on the hills and in the west, north and west coast. So we have these really, really attractive midge nets that team have to don, but sometimes it gets so bad that the only way to get a break is to head inside. So I think as a summary, for anyone thinking about doing something like this in the future, I would say have a clear vision for what you're trying to achieve. You don't need to fix it all in one go. Actually, if your vision is just to have record keeping at that new bed you've planted up, do that, do it well. Don't worry about the rest of the garden. You can then move on to that next in little chunks. So have a clear vision for what you're trying to achieve. Record all your decision making. We had previous inventories had taken place at certain properties. You know, a gardener would do it, or one of our students would come in and do an inventory. But I had no record of the decisions that they had took while doing that. So why they stopped inventorying halfway around the pond. Did they just run out of time? Or was that a deliberate decision to not go any further than that? They recorded all the trees, but they didn't record the shrubs. Why? I don't know. I don't know the answer to these questions. And it's added complexity to what we're trying to do, because we're trying to see into people's brains in the past that we don't know what they were thinking. No abbreviations. Don't ever let anybody put an abbreviation in your database, ever. It will make sense to you, but you will retire and you will go on holiday somewhere warm. You will, sadly, some of your staff will also pass away. That will happen. That's happened to us. And that abbreviation that made perfect sense to them, you have no idea what it means. Some of them you will work out, but some of them you will still be sitting there in 10 years' time going, what on earth does open bracket star S close bracket mean? I don't know. And have a go. I think any records are better than no records, and it will improve your management. And having records will also help improve the standing of your collections with your wider organisation. It'll help, certainly it's already helped in our organisation, from people who are not necessarily in the horticultural department, not just see our collections as something pretty around the house, something colourful that people have a picnic in, or visitors like walking through. You know, the actual plants in our collections are important in their own right. They're as old as some of the paintings hanging on the wall in the castle. They're rarer than some of the furniture. That's an original plant that was planted by the man who built the castle, and it's still there today. So actually, doing this project has really helped us improve the standing of our plant collections in our organisation. And I just wanted to finish very quickly with some exciting discoveries that we did so far. Like I say, we're only a year and a half through. I mentioned apple DNA testing. So we sent away last year, and we've sent away this year, but we don't have the results back yet this year. A number of our samples from our apple trees that we were really struggling to put an ID to. And we've got a member of staff who really is an apple expert internally, and he'd reached the end of his abilities. So we sent them off for DNA testing. And we got a really, really exciting result this year. The Isle of Canna, which is a tiny rock off the west coast of Scotland, has an apple tree in one of the gardens and the houses that is unmatched to anything that has been DNA tested in the UK so far. It doesn't have a cultivar name. Nobody's submitted it for testing before, and the reference database in the UK for this is quite extensive. So we potentially have discovered a unique apple tree that has survived on Canna, where a lot of other orchards have been replaced with more productive modern cultivars. This has almost been a refuge on the Isle of Canna. So that's enabled us to do some emergency grafting. Yeah, and we're going to spread that around some of our other gardens in the next couple of years, so that we don't just have one of anything as a dead end. So that was a really exciting discovery. It's enabled us to manage our national collections better. We hold a number of national collections, which for those of you who's not in the UK tend to be collections of cultivars of one species or type. The idea is to preserve the heritage of horticultural plants, not necessarily botanical plants. So this is Virginia. We have a national collection of different Virginia cultivars at one of our gardens. And getting that digitised has really helped us be able to track our collection better, know where it is across the garden, know that any work, if we do work in one area, what plants it might impact. It's to start telling the stories of our gardens better. So this is Broughton House in Kirkcudbright, which is the garden of one of the Glasgow boys, E.A. Hornell, who's an artist. A beautiful garden, lots of Japanese influences. But we've been able to start sharing the story of the plants in this garden with the public now, because we have our plant records up to date for this site. The wisteria in this picture, that's an original planting that he did. And you can see the link between the plants in his garden and the pictures and the paintings that he produced. And then I've already said daffodils, just the sheer understanding the sheer volume of some of our collections has been really, really useful. And we still have 1/3 of our collection left to audit. But like I said, at Greenbank Garden in Glasgow, which was started in the 1930s by Major John Hamilton, every subsequent owner and head gardener has added to the daffodil collection. And we now reckon we have over 500 different cultivars of narcissus at that one site. Being able to put a number on that, it's been really, really powerful for our internal processes. So yeah, that's me done.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was great.